She had the appointment booked first, my mother said, her tone suggesting this was the most reasonable explanation in the world. Your sister can't cancel. The salon charges a cancellation fee. I'd watched her say this while I was wearing the black doctoral robes I'd earned over 7 years of research, writing, dissertation defense, and intellectual sacrifice. My mother chose my sister's nail appointment over my PhD graduation. And what hurt wasn't just the choice. It was how easily she made it. How casually she dismissed the culmination of the hardest intellectual work of my life. But at my graduation ceremony, when the dean stood at the podium and announced, "Our valedictorian has donated $100,000 to our scholarship fund," my name echoed through that auditorium, and everything changed. My name is Dr. Maya Patel. I'm 32 years old. And the story of my PhD graduation is also the story of a mother who didn't realize what she was giving up by prioritizing a nail salon appointment. The decision to pursue a PhD had been entirely my own. My mother had been clear, from the moment I'd first announced my intention, that she didn't understand or support it. She'd wanted me to attend law school, or medical school, something that would result in a clear career path, a clear earning trajectory, and a clear way for her to explain my profession to her friends. A PhD in literature? She'd said, her voice carrying visible skepticism. What exactly will you do with that? It's not a real career path. You could end up unemployed with an extremely expensive degree. Why would you do this to yourself? But I'd pursued the doctorate anyway. Because there's something transformative about finding your genuine intellectual passion, understanding how language shapes human experience, how stories carry culture and identity, how literature creates the possibility of empathy across difference. Once you understand that, once you realize your life's work could be to help others understand this too, the decision becomes inevitable. 7 years. 7 years of graduate school. 7 years of living on a modest stipend that barely covered rent in an expensive university town. 7 years of teaching undergraduates while simultaneously writing my dissertation, grading their essays at night, conducting research in the early mornings, living a life divided between the work that paid and the work that mattered. My dissertation had been on post-colonial literature and the reclamation of narrative voice in indigenous storytelling. It had been accepted and published by one of the most respected journals in my field. I'd been offered a tenure-track assistant professor position at Stanford University, a position that represented the culmination of the brutal academic job market. The statistics are devastating. Only about 3% of PhD candidates in the humanities will actually secure a tenure-track position. I was one of them. And my mother had decided to skip my graduation because my sister had a nail appointment. My sister, Priya, was 28 years old. She'd never actually finished her undergraduate degree. She'd dropped out after 2 years. She worked in real estate and made decent money, good enough to support a lifestyle of frequent salon appointments, expensive vacations, and designer clothes. My mother had always favored her. This isn't me being bitter or resentful. This is just a factual, documented pattern of parental preference that had been consistent throughout our entire lives. When I'd asked about attending the same private high school as Priya, I'd been told that the family couldn't afford it. Even though my parents were clearly capable of paying, they'd simply made the deliberate choice not to. When Priya had taken multiple gap years, working part-time while occasionally taking community college classes without any urgency to finish, my mother had been endlessly supportive and understanding. "Take your time, Beta," she'd said. "Education isn't everything. Life experience is valuable too." When I'd worked full-time throughout my undergraduate degree, while completing my degree in 3 years to save money and graduate early, my mother had called it showing off and suggested I was being unrealistic and arrogant. Now, apparently, a manicure appointment was worth more than my PhD graduation. The morning of my graduation, I'd called my mother to confirm what time she and my father would arrive. I'd assumed she'd been joking when she'd mentioned the conflict the previous day. "Mom, right? What time does Dad want to get to campus? We need to be there by 9 a.m. There had been a long silence. "Beta," she'd said, using the Hindi term of endearment that somehow made me feel more hurt about that. "Priya's salon appointment is this morning. She can't cancel. She'd lose the deposit." I'd thought she was joking. "Right, but you'll come after her appointment, correct? The appointment is at 10 a.m. and it's an hour and a half," my mother had said. "And then she has lunch plans afterward. We won't be able to make it." "We?" I'd said. "You mean just Priya is going to the salon?" Your father wants to come to your graduation, my mother had said. But I have to take Priya. You know she hates driving in the morning. I had sat there, holding the phone, trying to process what she was saying. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, I'd said slowly. My PhD graduation, the culmination of 7 years of work, the day I become Dr. Patel, the day my dissertation defense is officially celebrated, is less important than a nail appointment. It's not about importance, my mother had said. It's about commitment. She had the appointment booked first. I'd hung up without responding further. What was there to say? My father had arrived alone. He'd been emotional, proud, he'd said, of everything I'd accomplished. He'd taken photos. He'd sat in the audience, the only family member there to witness 7 years of intellectual achievement being formally recognized. And my mother? She was at a nail salon with my sister. I didn't cry about it. Not because I didn't feel hurt. I was devastated. But because I'd learned something important over those 7 years of graduate school. My worth was not determined by what my mother recognized or valued. I'd spent 7 years around people who understood the significance of what I was doing. Professors who'd guided my research. Fellow graduate students who'd supported my work. Undergraduate students whose minds I'd helped expand. Colleagues who'd taken my scholarship seriously. My family's lack of understanding didn't erase any of that. So I'd walked into that auditorium in my doctoral robes, and I'd prepared to simply receive my degree, get my diploma, and move on with my life. And then the dean had done something extraordinary. After the traditional academic procession and opening remarks, the dean had invited anyone who wanted to make announcements about the graduating class to do so. University donors sometimes did this. Faculty sometimes announced special recognitions. The dean himself had taken the podium. Before we distribute diplomas, I want to acknowledge an extraordinary commitment to our institution, he'd said. One of our PhD graduates has made a significant donation to our scholarship fund. This donation will establish perpetual support for graduate students in the humanities. Students who, like this donor, are pursuing research that will change how we understand the human experience. I'd felt my heart start to beat faster. I hadn't told anyone about the donation. I'd made it specifically because my mother's words about PhD programs not being real careers had made me want to make sure that students like me wouldn't have to choose between financial survival and intellectual pursuit. The donor, the dean had continued, has specifically requested that this scholarship be named in honor of the students who will receive it, rather than in her name. But I want to publicly acknowledge her generosity. The dean had paused. Dr. Maya Patel, will you please stand? I'd stood, my hands shaking. The auditorium had erupted in applause. I'd looked over at my father, who had tears streaming down his face. The dean had continued. Dr. Patel has just completed her PhD in literature with a dissertation on post-colonial narrative reclamation. She's accepted a tenure-track assistant professor position at Stanford University, where she'll continue research that helps us understand how literature creates empathy across cultural boundaries. And today, she's given back to this institution in a way that will change lives. More applause. I'd stood there, overwhelmed, trying not to cry as the entire graduation ceremony acknowledged not just my degree, but my commitment to something larger than myself. My father had taken me out to dinner that night. We'd celebrated with the extended family who'd come to the graduation ceremony. My mother had not attended. The story had made local news. A young scholar donating to support the next generation of humanities researchers. The university's development office had sent out a press release. My donation had been mentioned in the alumni magazine. My mother had seen it all on the news that night. She'd called my father, I found out later, to apologize. To say she'd made a mistake. To ask if I would ever forgive her. I don't think I have forgiven her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because forgiveness requires understanding that the person understands what they did wrong. And my mother still doesn't seem to comprehend that a PhD graduation, the moment when years of intellectual struggle culminate in formal recognition, is a significant life event. She still seems to think that the error was in timing, not in values. I'm 34 now. I'm established in my academic career. I've published 3 books. I've been invited to speak at universities around the world. My research is being taught in classrooms and cited in other scholars' work. The scholarship I established has funded 23 graduate students so far. All of them are pursuing humanities doctorates. All of them are experiencing the same financial pressure that I did. All of them are being supported in a way I wish I'd been supported. My sister still gets regular salon appointments. My mother still thinks those are important. But she doesn't attend my academic conferences. She doesn't attend my book launches. She doesn't seem to understand that I've built a life, a significant, meaningful, impactful life, without her recognition or support. Which is maybe the most important thing I learned from that day. You don't need your family's understanding to be accomplished. You don't need their recognition to be valuable. You don't need their presence to matter. My father came to my book launch. My colleagues came. My students came. My fellow scholars came. The people who actually understood what my work meant showed up, because they recognized its value. My mother didn't come to the book launch either. The night of my graduation, after my father had taken me out to celebrate, I'd sat alone in my apartment and thought about the donation I'd made. I'd thought about why I'd felt compelled to make it. I'd realized it wasn't about proving something to my mother. It was about making sure that other people wouldn't have to carry what I'd carried. The knowledge that the person who raised them didn't believe in what they were doing. The knowledge that their intellectual work didn't matter to the person who mattered most to them. I wanted to be for other PhD students what my mother hadn't been for me, a source of support, a recognition that their work matters, an acknowledgement that pursuing knowledge and understanding, even when it's not financially lucrative, is meaningful. The dean's announcement had been about my donation, yes. But it had also been about something deeper. The public acknowledgement that my choices were valid. That my 7 years of work were worth celebrating. That my research would make a difference. My mother couldn't give me that. But the academic community could. And in many ways, that meant more. Because it wasn't based on obligation or family duty. It was based on merit. On actual accomplishment. On work that mattered. And that's something my mother can never take away from me. She missed my PhD graduation for a nail appointment. In doing so, she missed the moment when the world recognized that her daughter had spent 7 years building something meaningful. She missed the moment when her daughter publicly committed to supporting the next generation of scholars. She was too busy with a manicure to see any of it. And I've made peace with that, because her absence from that moment doesn't change what the moment was. It doesn't erase what I've accomplished. It doesn't diminish the value of the scholarship fund. It doesn't make my doctorate any less real. It just makes it sad. For her. Because she was offered a glimpse into her daughter's extraordinary achievement, and she chose a nail salon instead. That's her loss. Not mine. I'm Dr. Maya Patel. I'm a scholar. I'm a mentor to students. I'm a researcher whose work helps people understand themselves and each other better. I'm a donor who supports the next generation of intellectuals. And none of that required my mother's presence at my graduation. All of it would exist whether she attended or not. But I think she finally understands, now that it's too late, what she gave up by choosing a manicure over watching her daughter become a doctor. And that understanding, that recognition of what she missed, is perhaps the only apology I'm ever going to get.